Well, hello again. I'm Jim Cooper, and welcome to SigTalks. I'm chair for the SigTalk program and vice president of Sigma Chi's New York City area alumni chapter. Joining me as co-moderator this evening is Bruce Kastner. Now, Bruce is a 25-year Grand Trustee and past chairman of the Board of Grand Trustees. He's president emeritus of the Washington Alumni Chapter and a ritual master. He chaired the commission that conceptualized and rolled out Sigma Chi's Risk Management Foundation and was a member of the Risk Management Foundation's founding board in 1988 and served as the Risk Management Foundation chairman from 2010 to 13. Now, you're going to find out in just a minute why that's all relevant to tonight's SIG Talk. Let me add as well that it's no surprise that Bruce is an Order of Constantine SIG as well. At Sigma Chi, risk management is an important priority and part of the international fraternity's strategic plan. We have a strong risk management foundation that utilizes expert industry experience and active undergraduate member input to elevate the Sigma Chi experience by providing undergraduate members with practical risk education, access to essential group insurance, initiatives to improve student housing, and opportunities for professional and personal development for our undergraduates. Now, that having been said, tonight's SIG Talk features the topic of risk management in a corporate business context and a bit as well on managing risks in our personal lives. Bringing those topics to the forefront this evening is Spyro Karetsos, a 1996 graduate and Sigma Chi alumnus of Dickinson College in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. Spyro is a C-suite executive in the risk management profession. His credentials include the position of Global Co-Head of Enterprise Risk Management at Goldman Sachs. He was also at one time Global Head of Enterprise Risk Management with the Vanguard Group, and also Chief Compliance Officer at Google for 4 years, and is currently the Chief Compliance Officer at Remitly, an online remittance service-based business offering international currency transfers in 170 countries, what has to be a supreme risk management challenge. So Spyro, thanks for joining us on SIG Talks, and welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jim. It's a pleasure to meet you and Bruce and be here today.
Well, we're really glad to have you. And let me just, before we start and delve into the topic tonight of risk management, alert our audience that if over on the right side of your screen, you have a question that you'd like to address to Spyros during or at the end of our SIG Talk, just enter it in the chat or the comment section, and we'll reserve a little bit of time at the end for questions. Okay. Spyro, we always like to find out a little bit about our speaker before we delve into the topic of the evening, in terms of just getting to know you a little bit personally. So let's get started by learning a bit about your pre-Sigma Chi years. Where were you born and raised? And please describe for us what life was like before you enrolled in college at Dickinson College.
Yeah, thanks for asking. I actually was born in Teaneck, New Jersey, but I spent most of my youth growing up in Yonkers, New York. My father was an immigrant from Greece. My mother was a U.S. citizen. My dad became a U.S. citizen, so I got to watch him go through that process, which for me, I took a lot of pride in. And he did as well, getting U.S. citizenship. Being a New York City taxi driver, he worked quite a lot. Ultimately, my parents got divorced, and my dad had custody of me on the weekends, which meant I spent my weekends in a New York City taxi cab. So I ultimately, at some point in my life, I'm going to write a book on all the life lessons I learned while driving in a New York City taxi cab with my dad. I also grew up with my grandparents when my parents got divorced in Yonkers, New York. And they really told me and shared with me many lessons. They were Depression era. We actually used the living room of the house. They had guests that would come over, that would come by to talk current events. And they would expect that I would participate in discussions, not just sit there or be on a device or on a TV in another room. And those were the days where the living room was a real utilized room in the house. So I took those life lessons that they gave me, did my best in high school where I played football, lacrosse, and I swam. And I did want to continue being an athlete in college, which kind of leads us to the collegiate years.
Well, thanks for sharing all that with us, Spyro. It sounds like you had a great foundation in your early years. You did choose Dickinson College, an outstanding institution of higher learning, very high academic standard there. They're located in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. What was behind the decision to enroll at Dickinson, given that you were a New York City area boy?
Yeah, so like many students, I spent a lot of time with my guidance counselor trying to figure out the size of institution where I could compete athletically, the academics that would be suited for the career that I might want. And it was funny, I didn't know what career that I would go into. So my guidance counselor said, well, let's start looking at liberal arts programs where you'll build up all the foundational capabilities, whether it be presenting, writing strong papers and arguments, learning how to illustrate your perspectives, and take a broad array of courses. And then ultimately, that can help you with a foundation, which whatever direction you go into, you'll be positioned for success. And then I did need to find a school where I could play both football and lacrosse. The Division III level seemed to be the right fit. And I didn't want to go somewhere too far away so I could drive home and check on my grandparents. So we drew a map and created I'll call it a radius. And Pennsylvania felt right into that radius. And you may know Pennsylvania has a lot of really strong small liberal arts schools with Division III sports. And I ultimately sent my film around, and Dickinson was interested. I took the drive out there. It was a 4-hour drive from where I lived in Yonkers. Got a chance to meet the coaches and do a campus tour. And really, the investment that they made in me in terms of the financial aid package was the decisive factor of where I was going to go.
Well, it sounds like a lot of thought went into where you went to school, and I have the feeling you feel it was a good choice when you look back at it.
Yeah, I'll tell you a couple of things about it. Not only did I get a great degree there that I could build off of, I met my wife there, and she was also a student at Dickinson. My son goes there now. He's graduating this year, so we have legacy there. He also plays lacrosse there, so we still remain very close to the school today. And I really credit them to the success that I've had in my personal and professional life.
Very good. And another thing that happened at Dickinson was that you sought membership and received a bid to join Sigma Chi. What drew you to join our fraternity while at Dickinson?
Yeah. I don't know if I went to college thinking that I would join a fraternity or knew that that would be a decision point. But I will tell you that I'm the type of person that bonds with others, and brotherhood is very important to me. And from being on athletic teams, many of my teammates were Sigma Chi. And the opportunity to get closer to them, spend more time with them, and be part of an organization that had a community as a not only internal strength, but what we did for the community on campus and in Carlisle as a city, or things that I was going to take tremendous pride in. So it was really the people that attracted me and the brotherhood to be with those teammates and schoolmates, and we still stay together. And I just saw a recent brother that came to watch my son play last weekend. So it's those bonds that really attracted me to become a Sigma Chi.
Well, it's always great to hear a story like that, and particularly that Sigma Chi has come to mean a lot to you, not only while you were in college, but in the decades following college. Spyro, let's move a little bit now into what the main topic of tonight is, which is risk management in the corporate world, the business world. Your career has developed around the continuously expanding field of risk management, Most of us are familiar with that terminology. However, I think it would be worthwhile to hear from you, as an expert, the definition of modern day risk management. What does it encompass within a business organization?
Yeah. So I want to take some of the technical jargon out of the equation. And when I think about risk management, it's very much outcomes oriented. If you just take a coin, say a quarter, heads is a positive outcome and tails is a negative outcome. Statistics says if you flip that coin a million times, luck will have it that 50-50 outcomes will happen. A positive outcome 50% of the time, a negative outcome. And the other thing that you learn is that you can't prevent negative outcomes from happening. The only way to prevent a negative outcome from happening is not doing something. So if you're going to cross the street and you're worried about getting hit by a car, the only way to truly guarantee you don't get hit by a car is don't cross the street. So if we can agree that life and all decisions that you make have potential outcomes that are 50% favorable and 50% actually detrimental, and you can never get to 100-0. The most you can get to is, let's say, is 99% and change. Then you have to figure out is how much resources, time, and effort are you willing to get to move up the spectrum from 50% to 99.9% for a positive outcome. And it takes time, effort, and energy to get there. And that's really what it comes down to. So if you think about all the types of risks that a company could face, strategic risks, technology risks, operational risks, compliance risks, reputational risks, right? If you think about every risk, we can break them down into many discrete categories, even lower than those highest levels. We think through, where do we want to be on that continuum? How much would it cost us if bad things happen? And how much would it cost us if the remote chance of the worst case scenario happens? And what are we willing to put into effect to make sure it doesn't happen? And, if you think about how likelihood of a negative outcome could be, if it's remote, you can do things like insurance and protect yourself from catastrophe, like you have on your house potentially. You have insurance on your house in case there's a fire. And then you'll collect on that, even though it's a worst case scenario and highly unlikely. But if you think about day-to-day things that you do that could go wrong in your house, where you could have electrical issues or plumbing issues, you do daily maintenance on that or regular ongoing checks and inspections, and you invest the time and money for professionals to look at those components to make sure that you don't end up with some type of flood in your house. So that's what we do. We work with business leaders to determine just how much risk we're willing to live with. And if that is the risk we're willing to live with, what do we have to do to get there?
Well, it sounds like an enormous challenge. And, we know that it's become increasingly important to all businesses in terms of their success, well-being, and futures to manage those things well. Bruce, I'm going to turn it over to you to continue the questions for Spyro and delve a little further into risk management in the business world.
Spyro, it's great having you with us tonight. One of the reasons why risk management has become so important is that it can protect an organization's reputation. Can you draw an experience where you have led initiatives to do just that?
Yeah, first of all, Bruce, great to know that you're a risk management practitioner yourself. So I appreciate your technical expertise here, and feel free to weigh in. But in my history, I think the most interesting example is, some of you may have seen the movie The Big Short. And in The Big Short, I was at Goldman Sachs at the time, leading our operational risk organization. And as you know, during that part of the financial crisis, prior to the crisis hitting, many people were investing in derivatives called mortgage-backed securities. We were doing the same thing. It's where you take mortgages and you pool them together and create securities, and then sell those securities and make a market for those derivatives. Well, people were putting shorts on us because they believed that the housing market was inflated and was going to bust. And our CFO actually told us that, is it possible we're taking too much risk here, knowing that people put shorts on with us? So my team went out and did evaluations of all of the underlying mortgages that fed into our portfolios. And we came back with a response that said that the mortgages are overvalued, meaning that the houses aren't worth as much as the mortgages that people are holding. And with that information, our CFO decided not to invest more in mortgage backed securities, but to start divesting our portfolio. And we started selling that to other street firms. And in doing so, we freed up our balance sheet. And when the crisis hit, we were not impacted like others that went down, like Bear and Lehman, that were long established firms that failed.
Very interesting. Minimizing losses and liabilities are other key issues for businesses and organizations these days. Risk management has a leading role in such objectives. Spyro, take us through a case where a company has failed to do so and paid the price.
Yeah, I'll take a simple example. Just recently, companies have been called out. TD Banks, an example of that, for not having strong controls over financial crime, anti-money laundering, KYC, know who your customer is, and in running their business without those controls in place, bad actors were able to funnel illicit funds through their organization. And when you funnel bad money through an organization, you're actually enabling all that bad activity to happen and people to profit from it. And they got called out by the banking regulators, and not only were they fined, but an asset cap was put on them where they could not grow anymore. Another example of that asset cap was Wells Fargo. If you remember, they had a business practices problem where they were opening accounts for people like credit cards and mortgages without them knowing. And in opening those accounts without those knowing, that was a consumer protection violation. And they were also fined and put growth limitations on. And many executives lost their job as a result of it. So we talk about all of these case studies and we share them with our leaders to make sure that we don't get put in the same situation.
Conversely, what would be a success story for avoiding liabilities and losses, and how was it accomplished?
Yeah. So there's two sides of risk. There's preventing against the downside, and there's promoting healthy risk taking. And, if you don't have a healthy pursuit of risk, it's difficult to grow, right? Risk and reward go hand in hand. So when I was at TD Ameritrade, the crypto products started getting very hot. And we had to make a decision if we were going to offer crypto for spot trading or not. So we had to evaluate all the potential pitfalls around offering crypto. We also had to make sure that from a bank holding company act perspective, because TD Bank owned 42% of TD Ameritrade, were we even allowed to offer crypto to clients because banks weren't allowed to. So once we got through all of those hurdles, we ultimately were able to offer it. And in offering it, there was a huge reward on that because the transactional fees were quite high, and we were able to reap the benefits of that.
Many have advocated that there's a proactive aspect to risk management that fosters innovation, growth, and decision-making. Would you care to comment on how risk management contributes to these important characteristics of successful businesses and organizations?
Yeah, so if you think about businesses, they're typically on a life cycle, just like we are in our lives. Businesses that are very early on in their life cycles can take all the risk in the world. They're probably operating out of a garage somewhere, and if they lose everything, they'll just start over. And then you get to businesses like Google, where you have so much to lose because you're already at the top of your industry. And when I was at Google, we were launching AI for the first time, and we had to make a decision. We were going to launch AI as part of search, Google search, or were we going to launch AI separately as part of a product called Gemini? And we decided that it was too much risk to launch AI under search because so many people rely on Google search that if there was to be a problem with AI hallucinating and giving a bad answer, then we would lose trust and credibility in the product that we generated over 90% of our revenue with. So we decided to launch it tangentially on an adjacent as its own product with its own set of disclaimers. But we were very first to market around AI, and there weren't even rules and regulations about it. So we developed our own principles and best practices, and we held ourselves accountable. So the government got very comfortable that we were launching AI because we held ourselves to a set of principles even before rules were established. And in doing so, we actually gave our principles to the European Commission, and their rules that they ultimately came up with were derived from our principles, which meant we were in a great position to comply because we had already built the principles and complied with them.
Fascinating stuff. Jim, back to you.
Thanks, Bruce. Let's delve a little bit more into some of the other elements in risk management, Spyro. The element of risk appetite is a factor in both business and personal life. And I know earlier you were touching a bit on risk management in our personal lives. How would you characterize the meaning and significance of risk appetite?
Yeah. So risk appetite enables us to calibrate if we're taking what I'll call the right amount of risk. And I call it the Goldilocks approach to risk management. Remember Goldilocks? She goes in and she tries the porridge, and one's too cold and one's too hot, but one's just right. Well, it's the same thing about risk management. Taking too little risk is almost as bad as taking too much risk because you lose opportunities. And when you take too much risk, you potentially could burn yourself. So we have to find what we call the just right amount of risk for every type of risk that we face. And that is our risk appetite. It's how much risk we're willing to take on in that particular area so that we can achieve our objectives. And I mentioned the corporate life cycle. Risk appetite changes over the course of that life cycle around different risks. And if you think about your personal life, there are three primary risks that you face in your personal life. There's health risks, there's financial risks, and there's happiness risk. And you can imagine in different life cycles, you're willing to take different risk appetites. So when you're young and you feel like you're tremendously healthy, you don't worry so much about your intake of nutrition or the medicines that you take or the vitamins that you take. But yet when you're older, you might have a different risk appetite because you can see the end of the road coming sooner and you have to pay more attention to it. It's the same thing with your finances. You're willing to take on credit risk early in your life and use your credit card because you've got a long time horizon to pay it back. But when you're older, you don't want to have that debt so you can retire. So your appetite for debt changes. And then happiness is reversed. It's reciprocal to that. Because there are trade-offs in life, you give up on happiness and vacations and time off so that you can work and establish your careers. But in retirement, you focus on happiness. It's the primary thing that you spend time on, your hobbies and your family and what makes you the most happiest in life. So at different phases of your life, just like a company, we adjust appetites by category, and then we hold them up to ourselves like a mirror. And we ask ourselves on a mark-to-market basis, are we living that appetite or are we above it or below it? And if above it and below it, we have to take steps to either take on more risk or reduce our risk to get into appetite.
So thanks for giving us that context on risk management in our personal lives. Let me go back to what you were talking about, though, as well, in the business context, where you said at different stages of their life cycles, companies need to really kind of recalibrate their risk management factor. As a C-suite executive in that area, have you found yourself in circumstances where you really had to help the rest of the senior management team adjust their risk appetite based on what you saw about what was happening in the company?
Yeah, we're actually going through that exercise right now at Remitly. It's quite exciting. The question is, if you think about strategic risk, we have to achieve, we're a growth company, so we have to achieve growth of 20 to 30% annually. And the question is, have we placed enough bets? whether on products or different geographies around the world to achieve that. And what we'll do is do an evaluation to say, we believe we still have capacity to take more risk, launch new products, launch new markets and geographies. And then for other risk categories, we'll ask ourselves, take compliance, where I'm the chief compliance officer. Are we taking too much risk compared to what the regulators expect in different countries? And if so, should we reduce that risk? And do we get resources from the company to mitigate that risk even further? So for me, that exercise of going through risk by risk, leader by leader, and putting in quantitative benchmarks, so it's not just gut feel, but we can look at data to determine what our capacity for risk is. Think about capacity as how much you possibly can take versus how much we're actually taking. So think about driving a car on the highway, Jim. Your capacity is how fast your car can go. But we all know that there are rules of the road, and the rule of the road might say 65 miles per hour. Now, the question is, are you willing to take more risk and drive higher than 65? And you really answer that with is where are you going with and how fast do you need to get there? When my wife was pregnant and she got rushed to the hospital, I was willing to drive 30 miles per hour above the speed limit and risk getting arrested to get to the hospital in time. But on a day-to-day basis, I typically travel 5 to 10 miles per hour above the speed limit because I know that's the type of leeway you're given before you're pulled over. I also know qualitatively that you don't want to be driving alone in the left lane because that's when you get caught. You want to drive with traffic in the middle lane, less chance regardless what your speed limit is.
Well, some pretty good tips for driving from a risk management expert there. Let me move on to a different topic, which I know is very relevant today in the risk management context. A challenge faced by nearly every business and organization is cybersecurity. It would seem that cybersecurity lands at an intersection between the information technology and the risk management departments. First, I'd like to ask if this is accurate, but also what role does risk management usually have in cybersecurity?
Yeah, very much accurate. And typically in the C-suite, there is a CISO or a Chief Information Security Officer that typically rolls up into the CTO suite, the Chief Technology Officer, or the CIO suite, Chief Information Officer. That CISO is accountable for managing the cyber risks of an organization. And especially if you're a technology firm, I mentioned before, you cannot eliminate the risk. If you're going to be in business and technology, that cyber exposure exists. The question is, how much risk can we live with, as betting back to risk appetite? Now, in the cyberspace, we partner from a risk management perspective very closely to understand, A, what are the threats that are out there, and they're ever-changing threats? And B, what are our vulnerabilities for those threats to actually emerge within our organization? And when we identify that we have a vulnerability that threat could exploit, our next question is, how fast do we need to close it down? And this happens on a regular basis. And the technology organization puts patches in place to close those gaps. And the question is, how long are you willing to live with that gap open? And if you want to hire a lot of people to close patches, it costs a lot of money. So I always ask the question, are you willing to live with critical gaps being open for a day, a month, a quarter, or a year? And that determines how much money you're willing to spend to put people in place to close those gaps down. So an averse company, one that doesn't want that risk to emerge, will have a very robust staff and try to close those gaps within a day to a week. And a company that has a bigger risk appetite will not invest in as much in that staff, and they could have those gaps open from a quarter to a year. And it doesn't mean they're going to be exploited, but they could be exploited.
And with all the structure that companies can put in place to try and minimize their cyber risks, how much of a factor is the individual employee, who is doing things every day which could leave the company exposed. How big a factor are they in the risk management of cybersecurity?
Yeah, so cybersecurity is all about prevention and detection. And what we believe is our employees can be an army of emissaries on both of those. So, first of all, on the prevention side, they do not release certain information that's confidential. They don't share it externally, they keep it internally, they change their passwords, and they do their best to protect their hardware that they have and not lose their laptops, not leave their laptops in their car, right? Because all of those could be exploited. And then on the detection side, many times external fraudsters are phishing for information from our employees. And we actually teach them to what phishing looks like. We fish them ourselves sometimes to test them to see if they know what phishing is, to make sure they're not releasing that information or sharing it. And then at the end of the day, if we can have our first line of defense, which is our own people, do a great job in preventing and detecting, that is one threat vector we can eliminate.
Well, from what you're describing, it really sounds like cybersecurity and risk management is an everyday challenge, and one that the landscape on it changes every day. Bruce, let
And
me
Jim,
turn it
also
back.
on that real quick, you're only as strong as your weakest link. So
Mhm.
everyone can be doing the right thing, but one person does the wrong thing and everyone's exploited.
Wow. Bruce, some additional questions for Spyro.
Controllable element of modern day life.
Bruce, some additional questions for Spyro.
I think we've had a technical glitch. I'll go back. Spyro, social media is another important aspect of risk management, particularly with respect to protecting organizational reputation. How is RM leadership dealing with this dynamic and often uncontrollable element of modern day life?
Yeah. So it used to be that reputational risk was not its own category. It was a derivative of all the other categories or a consequence. So something goes wrong, either operationally or technically or strategically. And then by default, your reputation is impacted. But then we realized that there are some things in social media like slander, where, for example, in the corporate world, a hedge fund can short your company and then put misinformation out there to have people sell your stock so that they win. That is a pure reputational risk because it's slander. And in today's world of misinformation and disinformation, you have to keep your finger on the pulse of what's being said about your company and determine if you want to intervene and try to correct things that are wrong, potentially on social media. So we have not only an investor relations organization, we have a public relations organization, and they monitor our reputation. So they monitor social media references, they monitor public media references, and they determine if we should go in and make a statement to protect ourselves. And if you think about it, it's quite important because at the end of the day, you're only as strong as your reputation. And we actually can measure reputational risk and the impact of negative media or negative news. If you take your stock price, if you're a publicly traded company, and negative news hits, and it's an idiosyncratic event, which means no one had awareness of it in the marketplace beforehand, you first can determine to what degree your industry segment has moved up or down that day. And then you can look at how much you've moved in relation to that. So if I'm a technology firm and my segment has moved up 1%, but I have moved down 2%, the actual reputational risk from a market cap perspective is 3% for me because I should have moved up 1% as well, from an industry perspective. So we can then say from a market cap perspective, how much did this reputational risk event hurt us from a street perspective? And then how long from a duration does it take us to get back to where we should have been? And that duration tells us how long of an impact that reputational event is impacting our stock price.
As a risk manager, leader, and global chief compliance officer, You've had the opportunity to work closely with and reporting to boards of directors in prominent public companies. What did they expect of you?
Yeah. So first of all, within inside a company, there's something called three lines of defense. You have the first line, who are the business managers running the business, accountable for revenue. The second line, is which I'm in, are the checks and balances of risk functions and compliance functions that are challenging to make sure that we're not taking too much risk and that we're following the rules. And then there's the third line, which is internal audit, which comes in periodically and evaluates if we're doing the things that we said we would do. All three lines of defense are accountable to the boards of directors. And the board of directors has a oversight responsibility, and they have a fiduciary responsibility, especially if it's a public company, to the shareholders that own the company. And in their challenge authority, they're supposed to ratify the risk appetite that management wants to take to make sure it's a prudent amount of risk, and then B, validate that we actually are living the appetite that we've established. And when we're not, make sure that we have significant measures in place to get back into appetite in a timetable that they believe is acceptable. And in them doing that work and me presenting to them, that is the story that we do every quarter. It's that mark to market validation to get them comfortable with the amount of risk that we have. And if they're uncomfortable, to get them comfortable with the steps we're taking to get back into line.
How have you seen boards contribute positively to good risk management? And conversely, have you had experiences when boards either wouldn't cooperate or promulgating policy that was not conducive to good risk management?
Yeah. So the first thing that the board needs to do is hold management accountable. So when risks actually emerge and negative events happen, they need to have the first line business management stand in front of them and explain to them how it happened, why it happened, and what we're doing so it doesn't happen again. Holding business leadership accountable is a very important check and balance. The other thing to remember is that the board, in and of itself, has to get a comfort level that we have to take risk to achieve the objectives. Because if we don't achieve the objectives and don't take enough risk, then they're on the hook for not having the performance level that the company should have. And also there's a fiduciary responsibility for having that. So they have to push on achievement of objectives while also making sure bad things don't happen. So for them, it's not an easy place to be. And I've seen some board members do it really well. And the board members that do it really well have external knowledge and experience based on their time in running a business, where they can push and challenge using their specific expertise, where they don't just rely on what you're telling them, they push back based on their own knowledge. And then there have been boards that haven't done a great job of this. They either haven't held management accountable, they did not let people go when they should have, they have not fired CEOs, and it came back to haunt them.
Spyro, your career in risk management has spanned over 3 decades. You've had global executive responsibilities with companies including Goldman Sachs, the Vanguard Group, SunTrust Banks, TD Ameritrade, and there's too much ground to cover in a single SigTalk, but I'd like to ask you to focus more on your most recent 5 years. From 2020 to 24, you were Chief Compliant Officer for Google, responsible for the ecosystem of parent company Alphabet and all the related initiatives. How would you describe the risk management culture and key issues in that well-known company?
Wow, it's so complex. You could imagine at a holding company level of Alphabet, you have all the core Google products, right? So think about products you might use on a regular basis. Gmail, Search, Google Maps, Waze. And then you have all of the other bets that they're trying out for the future, whether it's AI related, as I mentioned before, or just so you know, if you go to Phoenix or San Francisco, you can take a Waymo, which is a self-driving taxi, to get you where you need to go. And then there are countless other bets that they're taking. So the broad portfolio of exposure is so wide. I had 1,000 people in my organization, and we broke up by covering all the different types of products that we had. And each of our teams would work very closely with Google. And, not only did they have to protect the reputation that they had of being a leader and a top 5 company in the world, they constantly had to reinvent themselves. They constantly had to innovate, which takes on more risk and compliance exposure. So that is why they segregated what they called other bets and the core business, which was under Google. So Alphabet was composed of Google plus 15 to 20 other bets. And our risk appetite for the other bets was way higher. And we didn't actually take the apparatus of Google and apply them to the other bets. We let the other bets grow without being so impeded. But we knew that on any given day, because of the relationship between the other bets and Alphabet Holding Company, one of those other bets could bring the whole holding company down. So we had to have a very fine balance and sweet spot between giving them the space to grow, but not letting them take bad bets where they could bring down the entire holding company.
And now to the present. Spyro, for the last year, you've been Chief Compliance Officer with Remitly, a company that features services that enable transfer of money internationally across 100 currencies. That sounds like a business with more than a few risk management challenges. What are your current priorities with Remitly, and how do you expect to help it grow?
So I'm not only the Chief Compliance Officer, I'm the head of our risk management organization. So I get to see all of the exposures you're thinking about. When you think about money movement globally, first of all, we're a technology firm, and from a fintech perspective, we have an app out there. That app has to be available. It has to work. The controls in place of making sure from an operational perspective that your transaction flows the way you expect as a consumer. All of that has to work day in and day out. It's the bread and butter of what we do. And then simultaneously, not only do we make sure good actors can use our tool set efficiently and effectively, but we have to make sure bad actors aren't using our tool set to fund illicit activities. So that takes a lot of time and effort. And you mentioned we do this globally. So we have to have licenses and deal with regulators all over the world so that we can operate within jurisdictions. And while 80% of the rules are common, there's 20% of the rules that are bespoke for that country or that region. So we have to make sure that we're complying with local rules, and we get examined by regulators. So we have to satisfy the regulators' examination requests so they can test that we're doing that well. And then you can understand that one of the mechanisms that we have to be successful is that speed to market is our niche. So if you want to move money tomorrow, we actually can get it there. When you push it through today, we can get it there within an hour, not tomorrow. And the way we do it is we actually have a forecasting model where we determine how much money is going from country A to country B every day. And tomorrow, we'll have already funded tomorrow's transactions today. Now, we take on FX exposure when we do that, because if we fund too much, we're sitting there from an FX exposure perspective in another currency that we may not want to be in. So we put derivatives in place to help us manage that FX exposure. That's called hedging. And then separately, the other thing is if we don't fund enough, we have to borrow money from our distribution partners locally, and we have lines of credit with them. But then we have to pay high interest rates. So we have to find the right spot when we're funding each country, because too much exposes us to FX exposure, too little exposes us to interest exposure. So this concept of risk trade-offs and balancing on a daily basis keeps us quite busy.
Well, after hearing all of this, there's no question in my mind we could probably spend another 2 SigTalk sessions going over some of this really interesting things that you've been involved in. Jim, back to you, sir.
Okay, Spyro, as we near the conclusion of your SigTalk tonight, I'm going to take you back to kind of a macro level question. Being a C-suite executive, global compliance executive, risk management executive, you've undoubtedly faced numerous complex challenges. We've heard about some of them this evening. What are some of the lessons learned in all that experience that you've had that guide the way that you address opportunities and problems in business today?
Yeah, so first is when you're responsible for the portfolio of all the potential things that can go wrong, you realize that you're probably a jack of all trades and a master of none. And your job is to get masters of all trades in their place on your team. So building out a strong team of technical experts that know how to qualitatively and quantitatively assess each of these risks is very important. And I'll bring that back to my Sigma Chi days. When you looked at my pledge class, and when you looked around at each of us, you realized that we each had different strengths and different weaknesses. We had different majors and minors, but in order for us to get the most out of our team collectively and our class, we had to find the ways to harness the strengths of each individual while not letting the weaknesses of some of us become a threat to our existence. And that's what I do. I try to surround myself with the best and brightest, people that I want to work for one day, and I trust them. And we put them in a position where we delegate authority to them and we let them make decisions based on their knowledge and only escalate as necessary from an arbitration perspective. But trust the people you're working with, and also make sure that they're empowered to make decisions, because too often everything has to go up to one leader. And that is a single-threaded disaster when one person is making all the decisions on what's right or wrong or too much or too little for any company.
Well, those sound like some great principles by which to lead and manage. One of the questions that we always ask our SigTalk speaker is, what advice do you have for our undergraduate and early career Sigma Chi's as they seek professional development and advancement in their own careers?
Great question. When I was an undergraduate, I mentioned I took a liberal arts degree because I didn't know what I was going to do. So being a risk management or compliance professional wasn't even on the radar. But what I did at that stage is I started interfacing with alumni or peers, and determining what their options were, what they were going to do. So I love this where you bring leaders back that have been in different domains or corporates, and have done different industries, because all of that creates awareness on the opportunity set. And then once you know what the opportunity set is, what I would highlight is your career, unless you're going to be a doctor or a dentist, your career is not a ladder. Your career is a jungle gym. You take movements sideways, diagonally, sometimes forward, sometimes backwards to get where you need to be. You try things out. You work for different companies. You have different jobs. You have different leaders. Some managers excite you. Some dissuade you from doing your best. I had to get master's degrees after my undergraduate work because I needed to refine my skill set around certain technical domains because I had such a broad knowledge base. So coming out of liberal arts, I was a policy major and an econ minor. I got an MBA in finance and then ultimately a graduate degree in banking because finance is so broad as well. So just know that over the course of your career, you have a chance to refine your knowledge, and you should try as many things out as possible, because the best advice I can give you is to be successful. You need to put in both sweat equity, which means you have to work really hard at your craft, and happiness equity, which means you have to be passionate about what you're doing. And if you feel like you can't put both in from an equity perspective, my recommendation is find a different career path or track, because you need both to be successful in life.
Well, that's great advice, Spyro, and we've never heard it quite stated that way before by any of our SigTalk speakers. And I really like your thought process in terms of try lots of different things and be willing to move sideways sometimes just to enrich your knowledge base and your capabilities. I know you touched on this briefly before, but I'll ask one more question and see if you have any more to input on it. How have your experiences as a Sigma Chi, whether they were as undergraduate or later on in life, impacted your personal career and your own professional development?
Yeah, so the alumni network for me is very important. I can tell you on LinkedIn, all of my class and the classes above and below me are still very much connected. When one person, and I remember very frequently, and recently, when one person needed an opportunity set or a suggestion on where to go in the next phase of career, everyone weighed in with suggestions or opportunities. It was so apparent that we were vested in each other. And it was from that time together, it was that brotherhood, and we were very influential. Meaning, at that phase in our lives, we were influenced by the older brothers that were there. They influenced who we were, and then we like to think that we influenced the classes that came after us. And it was that influence and ability to influence others that really helped many of us find a path forward. And you had hope because you knew that you were in it with others and that you would succeed in college, help each other out in classes or in extracurricular and post college. And it's just nice to know in this world that can be cutthroat at times that there are people that have your back. And that's the way I always felt with my brotherhood.
Well, that is really good to hear. And yeah, it sounds like you can really start learning a lot about how you can succeed in your career, right down at the level of what you learned in your chapter as an undergraduate and how you benefited from particularly from the guys who are a little older than you and a little wiser and a little more experienced. So I've been informed that we don't have any audience questions tonight. I guess we're competing a little bit with the NFL draft this evening, and I think you as an athlete, Spyro, can appreciate that. But this has been an outstanding talk. We've learned a lot. Your insights have been invaluable, and we really appreciate the time and effort that you've given to us on tonight's SigTalk. Any concluding comments that you have?
Well, first, I want a token of gratitude and appreciation for Jim. You and Bruce have been absolutely amazing in this planning process, very thoughtful on what would benefit this community. And what I would say to everyone out there, hopefully if you catch this on a recording or either live, is I am here for all of you. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn. Just mention that you're a Sigma Chi, and I can guarantee you'll get a personal contact back from me same day. We have to be there for each other. And by all means, if I may not have the answer or the right set of information, I can point you to someone who does. So please put me in your network, ping me when you need me, and I will be there for you because others were there for me. And I believe in paying it forward.
Well, that's a wonderful offer, Spyro, and really in the spirit of Sigma Chi Brotherhood, could have a lot of value for many people out there in the listening audience. So again, we want to thank you again for this evening, for all that you gave us and what we learned tonight. And with that, we'll sign off from SigTalks for the month of April 2025. And we'll see you next month in May. Bye for now.